So I'm Ed Conway, former director of the Center for Blood Research, happily giving that responsibility over to Hugh. But he asked me to make a couple of introductions. So it really is my pleasure to introduce Cedric Carter. Cedric is an emeritus professor at UBC, longtime CBR friend, member, athlete, contributor to our programs here. He did his medical training initially at the University of London and then moved to McMaster University, where he did research fellowships in internal medicine, hematology. He was the director of the Hamilton Regional Lab, and then he was recruited to UBC in pathology, hematopathology. And a major presence, really, at the University of British Columbia in contributing to all aspects of hematology and hematopathology. Had a huge, huge impact. Whoa. And they're trying to drum me off here. Anyway, he's a long time, was a long-time friend of Don and Dana, and he's going to give us a little brief introduction.
Thank you, Ed, it's a very positive introduction. I almost felt proud of myself. So obviously Don on the right, Dana on the left. The reason we're having this symposium today in the CBR is largely due to these two individuals. They both unfortunately have had to retire for health reasons. But because of the magnitude of their contribution, I'd just like to describe a few things for you. Sorry. Okay, so Don and Dana, this was a social event. They don't have an alcohol problem. Okay, so first of all, Don, that's an easy one. Local boy, born in North Vancouver, did his basic science degrees in physics at UBC, on to the University of Oregon biochemistry, and then two key fellowships. One was at Cambridge, surrounded by 3 Nobel laureates, and the other one is the Polymer Research Station in the Weizmann Institute in Israel. Don's PhD thesis, I read the first 10 pages and gave up, weighed 2 kilos and was 250 pages. So let's get rid of that quickly. Dana, a more diverse, interesting background, grew up in New England, in Dartmouth, USA. She was a token woman at Amherst College after 200 years of males only. She lasted a year, but this is relevant to what happened later, I think. Transferred to Boston University, magna cum laude. Then she had a wonderful experience at Woods Hole, which is the main marine biology research station. And she wrote her first paper on the chemoreceptors of the spatial orientation of the lobster. Not exactly hematology. Dana's a PhD. She went on to Duke University. She met Wendell Ross, who's now retired, but he was one of the most prominent hematologists in the States at Duke. He identified her as an outstanding scientist. In her PhD, she managed 16 publications with 8 as first author, really a spectacular sort of tour de force. At the time, I was consulting with what was the Red Cross, who was the blood supplier to Canada at the time, and I discovered that each province was allowed a research scientist with a budget. It wasn't occupied, so I was a bit, how should I put it, nefarious. I sat down with the local sort of Red Cross people, and I wrote a job description that only one person in the world could answer, because Canadian candidates got preference. Anyway, so I'm not going to prison. Anyway, then she became the senior scientist and eventually was the senior scientist for Canadian Red Cross. Now we have the Canadian Blood Services who are partly sponsoring this symposium, and they're the blood supplier now. Now, how did it happen? Well, we had a transfusion disaster. Factor VIII concentrates had multiple donors. We actually managed to kill over 1,000 people with HIV, mainly hemophiliacs, as you might imagine. 20,000 cases of Hep C, and it was decided that we needed a new organization to provide safe blood. CREBA Commission was commissioned to actually look at how to make things better. And CREBA came to the conclusion that since the CBS was really a biopharmaceutical, there had to be first-class research and development. So a large sum of money was put aside to do this. At this stage, some key individuals, 5 people from UBC, Dana, Don, and Ross McGilvery, who's sitting on the 5th row, looking intense. They applied for a grant and got a huge grant to build what is now Canadian Blood Research Centre. So that's where it came from, because of the CREBA Commission. And so that was the genesis of the CBR. Dana, 220 primary publications, and so on and so on. Don, likewise, 11 patents. Some of those morphed into things like the Cepadex beads you use for bioassays, but both stellar academic records, as you might anticipate. Highlights for Dana, well, obviously, helping found the CBR, introduction of D-dimer to clinical practice. I'm afraid it's clinical, but basically it started life in emus in Australia, and Dana eventually got into the, the marketplace as a medical diagnostic for diagnosing thrombosis. Lots of developments in blood products relating to her laboratory activities. She was very proactive in EDI long before it was fashionable. Now, you may have noticed that 9 of our 12 speakers are women today, but Dana was way ahead of her game. We're talking about essentially almost 30 years ago, or actually 30 years ago. She initiated something called NetCAD. Now, NetCAD is an acronym, but basically, earlier today we heard about deferred donors. You could be deferred from donating at a drop of a hat, but you're essentially healthy. But if you're giving blood as a healthy person, we weren't allowed to use it for research. So Dana identified deferred donors, and she's taking whole units of blood off the deferred donors and was able to process it in the way of it was a clinical sample. This was unique. 5 ml polystyrene tubes, not the way to study how you make blood products. Numerous awards. I think the biggest one was probably being president of the American Association of Blood Banks, the only Canadian to get this, and probably the only Canadian who ever will. But she was stellar in this field. Endless consultancies and advisory boards. This is one example of the advisory boards. For 20 years, she was a scientific advisor to the American Red Cross, which is the predominant blood supply in the United States. That was her level of eminence. She's also editor-in-chief of Vox Sanguis for what looks like 8 years, which is probably the second or even the first most important transfusion journal in the world. Don was basically a very good basic sort of chemist, physicist, biophysicist, call it what you like, but he was very interested in the biophysical concepts to clinical and scientifically important issues, cell-liquid interactions, neutral polymers, use of atomic force spectroscopy, etc. But also, very interestingly, you've probably noticed that Canada's overrepresented in the NASA space program. Well, there's too many of us. And the reason really was Don. Don looked at all the things he did on land with gravity, and then he made a micro lab that went up with the shuttle, and the astronauts used to come to his lab to get trained, and they looked at a whole series of biophysical things in a low gravity field. Still the only data on this. It's absolutely unique. Then the other thing he did, and we got the benefit today from Jay, who gave you a talk, he developed the polymer research group, which now Jay heads up most successfully. He also had a lot of administrative duties that don't directly relate to the CBR. Basically, he was very instrumental in finding research space all over campus for UBC. He was the Associate VP Research. He represented UBC at the various international university conferences. But what he did that most people aren't aware of was that in his business of trying to get basic science into the clinical institutions, he went all around town, Cancer Agency, VGH, St. Paul's, BC Children's, Brain Research Centre, and he helped develop these centres. So this is something that UBC was light on compared to, say, Toronto 20 years ago. Don balanced the books and got us competitive. Numerous consultancies, obviously the ones at NASA, and he was consulting for them until very recently. Key legacies for Dana, the CBR and CBS initiatives. The other thing she did was she greatly expanded the donor base. She looked at the so-called deferrals and realized that a lot of them, in fact, were, I wouldn't say spurious, but they weren't appropriate. So the donor base was expansion by simple epidemiology. She really took Canadian transfusion right into the international forefront. Now, the last chap to do that was Bethune. So he put Canada right back on the map in terms of transfusion medicine. Endless advisory things to North America, Europe, Far East, NATO, and the Commonwealth. So she went all over the world, basically advancing transfusion medicine, wearing a Canadian hat, despite her American origin. Key legacy for Don, a prolific innovator in the fields of partitioning, how things stick together, how they fall apart, all relating to electrostatic charges, molecular size, and so on. Developed polymer chemistry, we discussed, to a degree that there's a material science kind of registry, and he was identified worldwide as being the 11th most important contributor. The succession planning, very hard to do at UBC, but we have Jay here today, which is a tremendous tribute to John's foresight. His last sort of great act, I think, was, a great act, it's an evolution. It was basically he represented Canada to build a huge radio telescope in Hawaii. So commemorations, well, we've got the Dana and Don Bethune lecture, which will be the person talking immediately after me, on time, I hope, as I will be. The CBS has a special lecture that is their annual meeting of Canadian Blood Services, but also the Canadian Transfusion Society, in Dana's name again, so it's two high-profile events. I was chairman of the awards committee for pathology for a few years, and we had 9 prizes. I found a 10th one, and it was the Dana Devine EDI Award. Contributions go back 30 years, and I felt it important it should be acknowledged. Don, he got an existing award, which we named in his honour as being the most valuable contributor. Now, I've got to finish on time, so I will. Dana, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll find a very nice, sort of fairly succinct but adequate description. Don, unfortunately, with all his various activities, if you go to the web, you'll find a whole series of different sort of bits and pieces. We don't have a Wikipedia entry. If someone in the room here would like to do the honours thing, I can help them. Anyway, that's it. Dana and Don, two wonderful people, no longer with us work-wise, but really absolutely outstanding candidates.